Welcome back to On Listening. This is your host, Daniel Rosen, and I'm here today with Amanda Wattie.
Hi, Dan. Thank you so much for having me here. Super excited. I'm imagining that a lot of listeners might be wondering what a somatic sex educator is and how do we support people, or what do we do? And just to give a little background on that, I guess just in a few words, I would say that somatic sex educators really hold people where they are with whatever issue, so-called dysfunction, problem that they're experiencing, in a way that's very different than maybe other therapies and modalities, is that we invite them to start to listen to their bodies from a very deep and subtle place, that there's a wisdom there that they can access by tuning into sensation, tuning into breath, movement, sound, all those kinds of things. So,
well, other than the audience being interested in what it is, I'm interested, because every time you define the work that you do, I hear a different element in it. And so when I'm hearing you talk about the wisdom of the body, so it's a healing profession. You're working with people one-to-one to help them with knowing themselves, educating themselves. Somatic. What is the term somatic has to do with?
With the body. So somatic comes from the word soma, which is Greek for the body. So, there's other modalities like somatic experiencing, somatic psychology, those kinds of things. And it's about tuning into the body's sensations and experiences, rather than being in the head and coming from like, what am I thinking about this? Or even emotion, that feeling anxious is different than actually feeling the sensations of anxiety, which for some people could be elevated heart rate, shallow breathing, those kinds of things.
Could you say that again? Feeling anxious is different than the symptoms of anxiety?
Than feeling the sensations of it. So if someone were to say, like, I'm feeling anxious, that's an emotion, right?
Oh.
Yeah, or feeling happy, or I'm feeling angry. It's like, well, like what happens when your body, when you're in that feeling state, what's happening to your body? What's going on in there? Like, I know for myself, when I get angry, and this isn't, we go moment by moment, but I know, what anger generally feels like for me. And a lot of times I get hot, my cheeks get flushed. I can feel that in my face. I feel a tightness in my, my solar plexus. My breathing, definitely is faster. Yeah.
Interesting. Differentiating what happens in your body with the emotional state, where often they feel very close.
Yes.
And lastly, to define somatic sex educator, what's the sex part?
So if people are having issues with anything sexual, anything related to intimacy, relationship, this is the place where we really start to tune in again to the body. We look at things like interpersonal neurobiology, secure attachment, what's happening there a little bit. But then we also draw in from other modalities like mindfulness, even a little bit of the somatic experiencing that I spoke of before. So let's see if I can give you a little bit of an example, as you're asking about what is the sex piece of that. So let's just say that someone's having difficulty with, finding a way with their partner forward, that there's mismatched desire. So maybe it would be, wise to, for the couple to really come into this place where there's a listening that's going to happen, and a slowing down of what are you saying? And can I hear that? And can I watch my body respond? Because maybe, you're saying like, oh, I'm really not liking it when I have all this desire and you don't have any. And can we slow it down and see that there's this trigger that's happening, and there's a lot of stuff, and how can we bring in some tools to start to slow that down so both people can listen to each other, taking a deep breath, watching myself get really amped up, and then bringing it back down. Does that make sense?
It does make sense.
Okay.
I think that what I hear in that is someone wants something more than the other person does. And a classic thing that I hear is as sex therapists, and they're similar professions, sex educator and sex therapist, but different. What I hear is that the person who wants more than the other person wants, or has higher desire, kind of yearns for their partner to want them. But if one person is always in the asking for place, there's not very much room to leave space for the person who asks less to build up the energy to ask. And so when I hear you talk about slowing it down and letting the person who might not be having desire create space between the two of them and within themselves to allow that desire to emerge, that can only happen by slowing down and by deeply listening within oneself to what's happening. Because there's a lot of low desire maintenance sex that many people are happy with, but some people are tired of.
Yeah, and I guess that lends to, how are we defining sex, like right now in this conversation? Because if we're just talking about intercourse, for a lot of people, when you just make that's what you want, and the bar is that high, it can be so challenging, rather than just coming into like, oh, I want to have some fun and pleasurable touch with you right now. And where that goes, I don't know. But can we just see what happens, rather than going into it like, we're going to have sex now and we're going to try to make that happen. It can be so filled with pressure, and oftentimes it's not going to be successful, honestly,
Yes, I do know, and I'm sure some of our listening public has had the experience of that too. Yeah. So I'm interested in your understanding of listening, and I'm interested in what you have to say about it.
Yeah. Well, as I was sharing with you earlier, I really wanted to speak to how I even came into this work, because it involves you and listening. And so here we are, kind of in this full circle moment, which feels pretty cool. So is it okay if I share that?
You may.
Okay. So I was working as a massage therapist, and I had a lot of clients who were loyal clients, had known them for years. And so people share things, a lot of things were coming up about relationships, about, just all kinds of things. And I started to feel this pull inside of me, to be able to work with them in a way that was tending to the body, but also to the soul, with what I was hearing and the challenges that they were facing. I explored some Tantra training that was, I know in the West that word is so loaded, but it was a training that was very much about the chakras and working with that energy. And to be honest, it left me much more confused by the end of it. And I'm in no way, saying anything negative about Tantra. There's a lot of really beautiful healing components to it. But for this particular purpose, I should say my purpose, it left me kind of like wondering and longing and feeling a little bit like, this wasn't quite it. Like, this wasn't quite fitting the bill. And then shortly after that, I met Dan, or re-met Dan, through mutual friends, and found out that he was a sex therapist. And after that, he just kept coming to mind. Like, it was like he would just pop into my head. And so I listened to that. And in just my limited experience at that point of really listening to my body, I would feel kind of like excited, have that emotion. I'm not really sure what else was there. I'm sure there was a lot going on in my body as I was just considering all that. But anyway, I reached out to him probably after a week of this going on, and I said, would you just be willing to meet with me? And you did. And it was great. I got a lot of information just about different modalities that I could research. And I think that one of the other things you said was like, you definitely need a mentor. And
I did. I did.
And that was very valuable. I didn't have anybody at that point that was guiding me through where I was going. But I ended up finding my teacher, Kath and Jesse, who is out in Salt Spring Island in British Columbia. And she happened to be having a training 5 weeks later, and I went, and that was where I where I landed from just that one conversation, and I guess really where I have landed even now. And I just think back to when I first found, I think it was I must have landed on her site first and started reading about what this was. I did have this big feeling in my body of almost this swoosh of energy, up the core of my, from my stomach kind of up to my heart. And it's that was what told me yeah, this is a good direction to go into. So for listening, that's part of my process, and I think it's different for everyone of getting into the sensations. And then I discern, okay, what is this, and
right,
it doesn't always have to mean anything either.
Listening, I think, is sometimes the prelude to comprehending, to understanding. And when we listen to ourselves, to others, to the internal, I aspire to listen without pre-filtering, without imagining that I understand already. Because how could you ever hear or listen to a new concept if you had to map it on something that already existed? You'd preclude that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that.
And so putting things out in words and noticing it internally, and writing, even writing is a kind of listening. When we're reading, we're listening through words. Mm-hmm. Well, it's a heartwarming story. I can tell you, as I was listening to my body as you're telling it, it's lovely to be helpful to somebody, and to I remember that conversation and listening very intently to what you were trying to get to, and having no idea where we were going, none whatsoever. Yeah. Which is a wonderful, wonderful feeling. Mm-hmm. I think the obvious thing about listening is one of the obvious things. Maybe I shouldn't even say that. I don't know what people are thinking. But that when something is witnessed and heard or listened to by somebody else, or if there's a part of us speaking within ourselves to ourselves, that is an empowering, affirming, creates a sense of agency and power, mm-hmm. and makes things real. Mm-hmm. And it's sometimes a necessary step to going forward in any way. If I can't listen to what you said, certainly how could I consent mm-hmm. to what you asked? If mm-hmm. I hear what I want to hear as opposed to what you said, then I might not be consenting or agreeing with what you think you said. Mm-hmm. So it's powerful. Mm-hmm. Hence our conversation. So tell us a little bit about listening as it pertains to this very hot topic in world culture around sexual consent.
So I work a lot with Betty Martin's Wheel of Consent, which in a nutshell is about who's doing what and who is it for. And that's a lot about listening, getting clear. There's 4 quadrants in that wheel. I won't go into all of it, but
You got to do at least the 4.
all right. Okay. So serve and accept are commonly known as giving and receiving. So those are 2 that are related. And then take and allow. How's that? Or you want me to go deeper?
Well, so serve and accept, intuitively, I think I have a concept of that. Before we met, I was nervous. You could see a little physiological anxiety on my part about our starting this recording, and you said you would offer a hug. So it was an act of service that I accepted, and my heart rate immediately slowed down, and my voice slowed down, and I felt more relaxed. I had the reduction of that emotion of anxiety to reflect back on the difference between the physiological anxiety and emotion. So I thought that was a great example of serve and accept.
Yeah.
So take and allow.
Take and allow. So take, if I say to somebody, and I have a person in my life who's really not much of a hugger, they're not into hugs, but sometimes I want to give them a hug because I love them so much. So even though the action is going towards them, that I'm hugging them, and maybe they're hugging me back, maybe they're not, the gift is coming towards me.
Yes, that is more obscure. That's a harder thing to understand.
Yeah. Like I'm actually taking comfort, pleasure, goodness and ease, from touch that I'm giving to them, but it's for my benefit.
And allow?
Yeah. So it's like, that's where you have to, really watch the consent. Can I allow this? Is there something inside of me that's saying, no, I don't want this hug right now. And sometimes this person does say no. Physical touch is not their love language. And I love that. When I can really, hear that no, like I trust their yes so much more.
Yeah, that's a super important concept. The way I heard that was, if there can be no, then there can be no true yes.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
I hope people can hear the quotes of what saying no. If we can't say no, then we're not really saying yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good. So Betty Martin's Wheel of Consent, easy to access online. People will be able to find diagrams and other information about that.
Yeah. Yeah. There's great exercises on there that you can practice with, even a friend. It can be really enlightening. Yeah.
So then we talk about listening to the body. And I'm as a therapist, I do a lot of listening to the words, and I read people's posture and muscle tension and what we generally call the nonverbals. But I think when you talk about listening to the body, or when I think about that as a somatic educator or sex educator, maybe there's something different or deeper going on.
Yeah, so I wouldn't necessarily be just reading them myself without also inviting them into a greater exploration of what's happening for them. So
that is just too delicious to leave. So can you do that right now with me?
Like invite you to notice what's happening?
Right.
Yeah. So just start to scan. Just see, like, how are you breathing? Like, what part of your body is affected with each inhale and exhale? Like, can you just feel that, expansion, contraction? And just start to see, like, what, even just in that, just taking a breath, what's there? What can you become aware of? What's moving? What's stretching? So I'm going to throw out some words because, and I will say I'm always I'm disappointed by the language that we have for sensation, because there's not a lot. But what I love is when people actually start to use their hands to describe what's happening in their body, like that's part of the description. Or there's something in my stomach and I can't actually put my finger on what it is. I just know it's somewhere in my stomach and it's about the size of a football or whatever. You know, that there's a size, there's a shape, but there's, you know, we don't always have the words. I mean, but there could be words that we could grasp onto. There could be tingling, numbness, stretching, achy, you know, again, being more open or closed, things like that. So yeah, I'm curious, what did you notice when you took some breaths that were conscious?
Immediately I wanted to close my eyes because I'm turning my attention internally. Mm-hmm. And then I noticed how we're sitting in office chairs so that my knees are just about the height of my hips and doesn't give me my lower abdomen a lot of room to breathe. So I'm breathing more in the upper part of my torso, mm-hmm. which is never the breath that feels good for me. It always feels better when it's deeper. So there's a kind of constriction. Mm-hmm. That was the predominant sensation. So if I would have asked to either stand up or to go lie down or something so that I could have a freer range to experience that.
Yeah, I love that. And that's exactly what I do with people. It's like, okay, so this isn't working for you right here. So what do you need? Like, what would be better? And like giving people explicit permission to take care of themselves like that in a sort of environment where there's this hierarchy of like, oh, I'm supposed to know everything and you're coming in here for, you know, support or whatever. It's like, okay, we're going to move that aside. You know,
you're asking them to take. You're inviting them to take.
Well, I'm not actually speaking necessarily about consent right now, but just more, yeah. But there could be that. I mean, there certainly could be, maybe they need something from me. I don't know.
Oh, okay.
You know, but if they're clear, like, whoa, I would actually really like to lay down on the floor right now.
That's what I meant by take. Yeah,
okay.
Inviting them to claim the thing that's going to enhance the experience for them.
Yeah. And that can be so new and really empowering all at the same time of like, oh, wow, like I don't have to just sit here in this chair because that's what I thought I was supposed to do. I'm actually free.
Right.
I'm free to put my body where it wants to be.
Right. There is a freedom in listening and listen to your body. Absolutely. I feel that. And mm-hmm. So what gets in the way? What do you think interferes with people listening? I guess I can sort of answer that myself. I know sometimes I'm just afraid of what's inside me. I'm afraid that there's going to be some horrible impulse or there's going to be face a truth that's going to make me think that the only course of action is something that would be painful. Mm. So listening, there's lots of internal blocks to listening. Mm-hmm. What are some of the things you've?
Yeah, well, I'm curious about that. What you just said about these blocks, like, I guess in terms of like how it pertains to our culture, because we're moving so fast. Like, is that also part of, you know, we're sort of in this wheel of like, I have to do this and this and this and this, and then everything will be okay. But the problem is like that list is never going to end.
No.
And so we're just on this wheel, like running and running and running. And then we never stop and actually listen. You know, we're in autopilot and our boss is telling us to do X and we don't want to do X. So but we never go to them and say, hey, I actually don't want to do that. Right. And, you know, interesting story, if I may just really quickly, you know, I had a client return to me that took all of this work around consent and the wheel. And even though initially they had come really for their relationship and some work stuff, it really ended up benefiting them in that way, that they were able to, you know, not take on this other piece of work that, you know, their boss was ready to hand them, and basically said, I can't do that. I need help. And they said, great, go hire somebody.
Never would have asked if they hadn't listened internally.
Yes.
Well, of course, there's parallels in our personal and our professional lives.
Yeah.
Of how we either overwork ourselves or feel like we numb out and it's not particularly engaging or important for us. So obviously the rapidity of the digital age and the incessant demands of our digital devices make it hard for us to listen to what's happening inside. Free time, unstructured time, time with silence is an ever diminishing supply. But we don't have a lot of control over that. So, like, if someone were to walk away from this episode and say, I learned something from Amanda about listening to my body, what's a tool or a thing you'd recommend that someone might walk away from this and feel like they had something to put into practice in their life?
There's definitely things that we can do. Like, we can, exactly what I had just walked you through a few moments ago, like just noticing, how does it feel to take a few deep breaths?
And what are some of the blocks then that get in the way? What do you hear happens to people?
Yeah. Like why they don't do that?
Yeah.
They forget. You know, that's honestly what it is. So we create little anchor points that, like, maybe it's like once they get in their car in the morning before they go to work, like, you know, that's the time, like somehow getting into their vehicle, like that will be like a cue. Maybe they do a body scan meditation before they go to bed. Like we kind of created around their life already. But this is a big part of the practice, I believe, or at least for me, that I like talking with people about their resistance, about like what's coming up, like what is stopping you from doing this thing that you just experienced here with me that felt really good, you know? And what, like,
yes,
when are you going to, when can you value yourself and your own wellness enough that it's not like everybody else's needs above mine, you know?
Yeah, well, that valuing. So I think that, again, to go to that split between comprehending and listening, that the resistance happens sometimes before we fully comprehend what the thing is that we're afraid of. I think there's something about just being nervous about an intense emotion or a fear that it's going to be the consequence of, if I really listen. What's a great example? Like breaking up, you know, do I stay or do I go? Right. So to have that inner dialogue, a person might be very afraid of, yeah, I gotta go.
Yeah.
And can we give ourselves permission to listen, even not knowing? It's the hardest thing, I think. If I listen, what am I going to hear? Yeah,
I went through that last year right around this time, and it was probably one of the most transformational moments of my life when I finally was like, this feels really horrible, and I have to let go and go into the unknown of, you know, that I don't have this all figured out, and my agenda is not going to work.
The suspension of comprehending. We talk about the suspension of disbelief or suspension, you know, we don't know, right? So to invite, almost an intentional inviting of the unknown and the vulnerability.
Yeah, for me, it was, you know, we're going into a dark time of year right now, or we're in a dark time of year, and I spent a lot of time sitting in the dark. That was part of my healing, was, you know, even if it was only 5 minutes a day of sitting in meditation.
I love that idea of rushing to the, you know, running to the, I originally heard it sort of running to the roar, but this idea that there's things that we are avoidant of and we have to go towards them, experience them and listen to what they have to tell us.
Yeah. But that place between, you know, you're saying, well, if someone is having resistance, or I don't know how you were describing it exactly, or it's like they're not finding the time to do it or whatever. It's like, that's okay. When you're aware, you catch yourself like, oh wow, like I didn't do any of that for myself today. Like that's part of it. Like we're building the awareness piece, and then we can move into the action, you know? So I get really excited about that. Even if it's like, it's not about doing the thing, it's about noticing that you didn't do the thing.
Yes.
You know?
Completely. Right. Well, thank you so much for being here. Our time is coming to an end.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. I really appreciate you coming and sharing your wisdom. Our guest has been Amanda Wattie, somatic sex educator in Rochester, New York. And that concludes another episode of On Listening. Thank you so much for listening. You can email me, dan@onlistening.net. I'm interested in suggestions for guests for the show, comments, questions. I'm going to read everything that you write. Like and subscribe, share on my Facebook page, rate and review wherever you're listening to this podcast. Thank you so much.